I was ankle deep in chlorinated water, garden hose in one hand and a cold soda in the other, when I heard the unmistakable shriek of Karen, a sound so shrill it made my sprinkler system flinch. "Stop draining our pool," she screamed from behind my 6-foot wooden fence like she was summoning neighborhood demons. I looked around, wondering if she'd gotten lost or maybe heat stroke had finally cooked her remaining brain cell. "It's my pool," I called back, still unsure if she was serious. But then I heard the familiar tone of a phone dialing, and her next words hit harder than a belly flop off the diving board. "Yes, 911. I need to report a man destroying community property." And just like that, my lazy Sunday became a live episode of Karen versus reality. I should have known something was up when I moved into the neighborhood last summer, and people warned me to keep your fence high and your garden hose locked. I thought they were joking. Turns out they were warning me about Karen, a woman so entitled she once tried to schedule mandatory lawn synchronization days so everyone watered at the same time for curb appeal unity. Her house sits diagonally behind mine, separated by a row of hedges, a fence, and hopefully common sense. But clearly that wasn't enough. I had decided to drain my backyard pool to do some long overdue maintenance. Cracks had started forming around the edges. Algae was creeping in like an uninvited guest, and the water smelled like regret and sunscreen. It was my pool on my property, paid for and maintained entirely by me. I'd even double-checked city regulations and HOA guidelines just to avoid unnecessary drama. Spoiler alert, none of that mattered to Karen. She stormed around the fence and into my backyard like she owned the place. No knocking, no texting, no hesitation, just rage, slippers, and a wine-stained bathrobe that looked like it had seen several failed relationships. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, pointing at the water draining into the yard like I just dumped radioactive waste into the local reservoir. "You can't just destroy community assets. This is theft." I blinked, wondering if she was somehow under the impression that my backyard pool, with its big blue dolphin floaty and faded inflatable pizza slice, was a public utility. "This is my private pool," I said slowly, like you talk to a confused toddler. "It's in my backyard on my deed land, paid with my money." Karen looked insulted that I dared speak logic in her presence. She whipped out her phone again and started snapping pictures of my yard like she was building a criminal case. "You're going to regret this," she muttered. "This affects everyone. You're draining valuable resources the whole community could use." "Lady, the only thing this affects is my water bill," I said, turning off the hose just so I could process her insanity in peace. But she was already pacing like a caged Karen in the wild. That's when she blurted something truly unhinged. "I used to be on the HOA board. I know the rules. That pool is visible from the street. That makes it shared property." If it wasn't so absurd, I would have laughed. But instead, I sighed and grabbed my phone, pulling up the actual HOA bylaws I had saved when I moved in. "Look for yourself," I said, handing her my phone. "Section 14 bits, private outdoor installations, including pools, fountains, and hot tubs, are the sole responsibility and property of the homeowner." She glanced at the screen, scrolled for 2 seconds, then handed it back without acknowledging a word. "I'll let the authorities sort it out," she said smugly, just as 2 local police cruisers pulled up to my driveway. Apparently, calling 911 and yelling community destruction will trigger an actual dispatch. The officers walked up with raised brows and notepads in hand. Karen sprinted toward them like a game show contestant, pointing dramatically at me and shouting, "There! That man is draining a neighborhood resource." The officers exchanged looks and then turned to me. "Sir, is this your property?" one of them asked, polite but clearly amused. "Yes," I replied, "and the pool is mine too." "You got proof of ownership?" he asked. I gestured at the house. "Title's inside. I can get the papers, or you can ask literally any neighbor who lives within 2 blocks. Karen butted in. "He's lying. This pool has been visible from the sidewalk since forever. That makes it a shared aesthetic at minimum. He's violating community harmony." One of the officers rubbed his temples like he just stepped into a live headache. Visible doesn't mean communal. If that were true, every flower bed in town would be a public park. Karen started to protest again, but the second officer gently took her aside and asked for her contact info, probably just to keep her busy. The first officer gave me a tired smile. We're not issuing any citations, but maybe you want to consider getting some taller hedges. As the police wrapped up and left without making any arrests, Karen stood at the edge of my lawn like she was trying to hex me. "This isn't over," she said in a low voice like a bad soap opera villain. Then she stomped back through the gate, nearly tripping over my garden gnome on the way out. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But later that evening, I noticed a flyer stuck to my mailbox. In bold Comic Sans font, it read, "Pool vandalism in our midst. Emergency HOA meeting proposed." Underneath was a blurry photo of me holding the hose, taken from behind a shrub. My face was partially hidden by the soda can, but Karen had drawn a giant red circle around me with the words "Pool Criminal" scribbled in Sharpie. I sighed, shook my head, and went inside. Clearly, Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance. She was going to war, and unfortunately for her, I hadn't even started fighting back. The next morning, I walked out to grab the paper and found a stack of HOA newsletters rubber banded to my gate. That wasn't unusual. Our HOA president liked to hand deliver them with personalized notes. But these were different. These were printed in full color, with an entire page dedicated to neighborhood water management violations, complete with a cartoon pool being sucked into a drain and the words, "Is your neighbor destroying our shared oasis?" in bright red letters. Karen had clearly taken things into her own hands. It was so ridiculous I almost laughed, until I saw that every single mailbox on our street had a copy. She'd gone full propaganda mode overnight. By noon, I was getting side-eye from people walking their dogs, including the Thompsons, who always waved at me before. Even Mr. Davis, the sweet 80-year-old who used to ask me about my tomatoes, suddenly clutched his poodle a little tighter when I smiled at him. Karen's whisper campaign was spreading. She'd taken her obsession with my pool and turned it into a neighborhood morality tale. In her warped narrative, I wasn't just draining water. I was draining trust, draining unity, draining the spirit of suburban America. That afternoon, I got a knock at the door. It wasn't Karen this time, but her latest minion, a guy named Josh who had recently moved in down the block and clearly didn't know any better. Josh introduced himself with an awkward smile, holding a clipboard and wearing an HOA volunteer badge that looked like it had been printed that morning. "Hey, just doing a quick check-in," he said. "You know, friendly neighborhood water audit." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're doing a water audit?" He chuckled nervously. "Yeah, Karen mentioned some concerns. Something about chlorine runoff, potential chemical imbalance in the soil, erosion." "Erosion?" I raised an eyebrow. "Well, yeah," he said, flipping through his clipboard like he was searching for something that made this less stupid. "She said if the water drains into the wrong place, it could, destabilize flower beds." I stared at him for a long moment, then pointed toward the backyard. "You're welcome to take a look, Josh, but I can save you the trouble. The water drains directly into the permitted runoff area, and the chemical levels are so low they wouldn't kill a dandelion." He hesitated, then stepped back. Right, okay. Well, just doing my duty, you know how it is." As he left, I watched him walk straight toward Karen's house, where she was waiting with a smug look and what looked like a lemon bar on a paper plate. Josh had been bribed. She was recruiting with baked goods now. I decided it was time to shut this down. I called Diane, our actual HOA president, who was thankfully sane and didn't think backyard pools were shared neighborhood resources. Diane answered with a weary tone that told me I wasn't the first person calling about Karen this week. "I already know," she said before I even explained the situation. "She's been blowing up my inbox with claims about communal chlorine rights. Honestly, I'm this close to revoking her ability to submit reports. So she has no authority?" I asked. "None. She was removed from the board last year after trying to fine a family for having a pink flamingo in their yard." "Sounds about right," I muttered. Diane assured me the HOA wouldn't be taking any action and told me to ignore any fake violations Karen tried to send. But the problem was, Karen didn't need the HOA's permission to be a public nuisance. The very next day, I caught her in my yard again, this time standing on a step stool near my fence, measuring tape in hand, apparently trying to prove that my pool was visible from the public sidewalk and therefore contributed to the community aesthetic. She didn't even flinch when I caught her. According to Clause 7 bits in the revised HOA packet, any feature that adds visual value to the neighborhood is technically part of shared court appeal, she said. Clause 7 bits, I asked. The packet you wrote yourself. It's in circulation, she said confidently. In your printer tray? Karen didn't respond. She just scribbled something in her little notebook and stomped away, muttering about documentation for future legal proceedings. I started noticing small things after that. Trash from her yard would blow suspiciously into mine, an entire bag of party napkins with flamingos on them. My mailbox got jammed with flyers for community beautification meetings that I'd never heard about. Someone left a bag of pool salt on my porch with a note that said, "For your next selfish act." Every time I walked outside, I could feel her watching. Her curtain would twitch, and I'd hear the click of her phone camera. It was like living next to a neighborhood stalker with a water fixation. Then came the letter, a fake HOA citation with an official-looking logo and a threatening tone, claiming I owed a $500 fine for unauthorized water displacement. I brought it straight to Diane, who burst out laughing after reading it. "This is in Comic Sans," she said. "She's not even trying anymore." Diane sent out a formal HOA-wide memo debunking Karen's letter and reminding everyone that private pools were just that, private. I thought that would end it, but Karen wasn't going down without a final tantrum. The following morning, she erected a homemade sign right outside her fence, facing my property. It read, "Warning, selfish neighbor draining community unity. Shame pool ahead." I stood there staring at it, wondering if she expected passing joggers to stop and mourn the death of togetherness over my pool maintenance. The sign was handmade, painted in red and white, and framed with fairy lights. She'd turned it into an art installation. I briefly considered calling the city about visual pollution, but instead, I just walked into my garage, grabbed a speaker, and started playing whale sounds on a loop at full volume, aimed directly at her house. 2 hours later, she called the cops again, this time for sonic harassment. When the officers arrived and I showed them her sign, one of them actually asked, "Is this a prank war or a domestic standoff?" It just shrugged. Honestly, at this point, I don't know anymore. But I did know one thing. Karen wasn't going to stop until I either moved or surrendered my pool rights to her imaginary water empire, and neither of those were happening. So if she wanted a battle over a drained pool, then fine, I was ready to go all in, because I had a few tricks of my own coming, and Karen wasn't prepared for what was next. It started with a thud. I woke up one morning to find 3 large envelopes shoved violently into my mailbox, their edges crumpled like whoever delivered them had been trying to cram them in with vengeance. I opened the first one cautiously and found a crudely formatted final HOA violation notice stamped in red ink. The violation: irresponsible pool management resulting in emotional distress to neighboring households. The second was a petition filled with 20 signatures, none of which belonged to actual residents. I spotted names like Patriarchy and Anita Goodneighbor written in the same handwriting in the same blue glitter pen Karen used to label her recycling bins. The third was a handwritten letter addressed to me personally, beginning with "To the enemy of neighborhood wellness," and ending with a dramatic warning: expect consequences. I didn't even bother getting mad. I just set them all on the counter and went about my morning like it was any other day. But things escalated quickly. That afternoon, I discovered the first real act of sabotage. My pool pump, which had been running perfectly fine for over a year, suddenly stopped working. At first, I thought maybe the drainage had clogged the system, but when I checked the back panel, the wires had been yanked and reattached incorrectly, like someone had tried to fix it and ended up nearly shorting the whole thing. I checked the security footage, and sure enough, there she was. At exactly 2:41 a.m., Karen had entered my yard in full night raid fashion. Flashlight in hand, hoodie pulled over her iconic platinum bob, and a screwdriver clenched between her teeth like she was some rogue pool technician. She tiptoed across my lawn, unplugged the system, muttered something to herself, then vanished like a chlorine-obsessed ninja. I brought the footage straight to Diane, who nearly spit out her coffee laughing but quickly composed herself. "This is next-level insanity," she said. "You want me to send this to the board?" I told her yes. I didn't care about making her look bad anymore. I wanted it documented, every step. Because it was no longer about a pool. It was about principle. Karen had declared war, and I was done playing defense. Within 48 hours, Karen shifted gears. She stopped sabotaging and started weaponizing the HOA's own systems. She submitted daily complaints through the neighborhood app. One morning, I received 5 different alerts before I even got out of bed. Noise violation, pool equipment too loud. Safety violation, pool ladder not up to HOA code. Environmental concern, possible mosquito breeding ground. Each one more absurd than the last. I responded politely at first, attaching photos of my silent pump, my brand new ladder, and even my bug-free backyard. But the messages didn't stop. She didn't want resolution, she wanted attention. Then came Victor. He showed up on a Saturday morning wearing a neon safety vest and a baseball cap that said Aqua Authority. He claimed he was a licensed pool inspector hired by the HOA for an emergency inspection. I asked for credentials. He pulled out a business card that read Victor's Custom Concrete and Karaoke. When I laughed, he tried to get serious. "Your levels are a danger to the community," he said, waving a test strip like it was a warrant. I told him to leave. He refused, so I called the police. When they arrived, Victor bolted so fast he forgot his fake clipboard. Inside it were printed directions from Karen, complete with a diagram of my backyard and a note. Try to scare him into draining it again. Say it's a biohazard. The officers shook their heads. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, actually asked, "How do you live next to her without losing your mind?" It told him the truth. I was close, very close, and I had a feeling things were about to go from weird to full-on outrageous. I was right. That night, I was watching T when my motion lights flared on. I checked the cameras and saw Karen creeping into the yard again, this time with a garden hose. She marched straight to the pool and started spraying water inside, like she was performing a sacred rite of purification. I grabbed my phone and walked out. "You seriously think you can just walk into my yard and refill my pool now?" I asked. She didn't even flinch. "It's for the neighborhood," she said, with the kind of conviction usually reserved for cult leaders. "You don't get to unilaterally decide to remove a shared visual amenity." "It's a hole in the ground surrounded by a privacy fence," I said. "No one but you can even see it." She kept spraying like I hadn't said a word, so I walked over and turned off the spigot. She looked at me like I just slapped her. "This is why the community is crumbling," she said, still holding the hose like a sword, "because people like you don't understand the meaning of shared values." He told her to leave. She refused, so I told her I was calling the cops again. Her eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I dare," I said, dialing. That time, the cops didn't even pretend to take her seriously. Officer Rodriguez showed up again, looked at the hose, looked at her, then calmly asked, "Do you have permission to be on this property?" She tried to twist it around. "He invited me last month for lemonade." "Did he invite you tonight?" Rodriguez asked. "No, but..." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Karen stomped away without another word, but something had shifted, the way she looked back at me, the venom in her stare. It wasn't just frustration anymore. It was humiliation, and I knew she'd come back swinging. The next morning, I found a flyer taped to every tree on the street. Community Swim Day, sponsored by HOA neighbor Karen. Free popsicles, free towels, shared pool access for all. The flyer had a photo of a pool, my pool. Except she'd used an old picture from last year when the water was still clean and blue. I stared at it for a full minute before realizing she was trying to host a neighborhood pool party at my house. By noon, people were showing up. Parents with strollers, kids in floaties, 2 guys with folding chairs, all of them confused when they found the pool drained dry and locked behind a gate. Karen showed up 10 minutes later with a cooler and a whistle around her neck. "The HOA sabotaged this," she shouted. "They drained the pool just to spite us." One of the dads asked, "Isn't this just some guy's house?" Karen blinked. "It doesn't matter. It's part of the shared aesthetic." I stepped outside and stood silently, arms crossed, letting the sight speak for itself. Dry pool, locked gate, and a crowd of people who suddenly realized they'd been duped. One by one, they left. Karen stood there alone, holding her popsicle box like it was the last remnant of a lost empire. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was worried, but because I was planning. Karen wanted a war. Then it was time I stopped playing nice. No more HOA meetings. No more logical explanations. No more hoping she'd just get bored. I was going to make her sorry she ever thought a pool was something you could steal with a hose and a flyer. The next chapter wasn't going to be about defense anymore. It was time to get creative. I spent the next morning rewiring my backyard like it was the set of a prank show. Karen had crossed every line imaginable, faking HOA documents, staging a community pool day on my property, and repeatedly trespassing like it was a hobby. I wasn't just done being polite. I was done being reactive. It was time to take the fight to her with a dose of poetic justice she'd never forget. First, I installed motion-triggered floodlights, bright enough to make it look like a UFO was landing the moment someone stepped into my yard. Then I added ultra-sensitive sprinklers that activated with even the slightest movement, ready to blast any uninvited guests. Lastly, I set up a discreet outdoor speaker system programmed to play a custom audio file on command. It wasn't music. It was a loop of Karen's own voice screeching from previous altercations, pulled from security footage, edited perfectly to sound like a meltdown. She'd unknowingly become the star of her own humiliation. I didn't have to wait long. That very night, the motion lights flared to life at exactly 2:17 a.m. I checked my camera feed, and sure enough, Karen was back. She wore a dark trench coat like she was auditioning for a spy movie and carried a duffel bag full of pool chemicals. It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was planning. She was going to refill my pool with her own mixture of water and chlorine, probably to support her delusion that she'd restored community access. The moment she stepped past the sensor, the sprinklers activated with a sudden hiss, soaking her from head to toe in freezing cold water. She shrieked, flailing like a cat tossed into a bathtub, and tried to retreat. That's when the speakers kicked in. Her own voice echoed through the yard, yelling this is community property. You'll regret this, over and over like some unholy chant. She screamed again, this time in horror, and stumbled backward into one of the flower beds. The light, the water, and the audio created a nightmarish chaos that sent her bolting through the gate and across the street, soaked and disoriented. I watched from my bedroom window with a warm cup of coffee, smiling like a man who'd just taken back his sanity. But it wasn't over yet. The next morning, I reviewed the footage, clipped the best parts, and sent them straight to the HOA board under the subject line, Karen's unauthorized pool reclamation mission, Exhibit A. By noon, I received a call from Diane. She couldn't stop laughing. We're calling an emergency meeting, she said, not to punish you, just to finally, officially deal with her. I offered to bring popcorn. She told me I might not need it. Apparently, several other neighbors had similar complaints and footage. Turns out Karen had been on a spree, sneaking into yards, leaving notes, and taking photos of backyard furniture to post in her HOA Standards Facebook group, which had only 3 members, Karen, her cousin Kyle, and someone named Neighborhood Sentinel, whom I'm 99% sure was just another alias of hers. The emergency HOA meeting was held that Saturday in the community rec center. I almost didn't go because I assumed Karen wouldn't dare show her face after the sprinkler incident, but I underestimated just how immune she was to shame. She arrived 15 minutes early, arms full of printed documents, her hair still frazzled from the drenching. She acted like nothing had happened. As the room filled with residents, many of whom were there out of pure curiosity or for entertainment, Karen took the floor without being asked and launched into a monologue about community cohesion and visual ownership of aquatic features. She even presented her own version of the HOA charter, printed and bound in a glittery binder labeled Karen's Corrected Copy. Diane let her go on for a few minutes before stepping in. Karen, we've received multiple complaints of harassment, trespassing, and misrepresentation. Karen tried to interrupt, but was shut down quickly. This is not a court. This is a homeowners association, and you, despite your fantasies, have zero legal authority to enter someone's property, interfere with their equipment, or throw a pool party in their name. Karen turned red, but she wasn't done. I did it for everyone. If we don't fight for our visual values now, what's next? Individualized paint colors? Uncoordinated flower pots? Anarchy? The room broke into laughter. Even Cal, seated awkwardly at the back, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. One by one, neighbors began to speak up. Mrs. Green talked about how Karen left a fake violation on her car for having excessively shiny hubcaps. The Robertsons said she accused their toddler of unlicensed bubble blowing. And Mr. Davis finally admitted that Karen once tried to report his poodle for excessive tail wagging near sensitive shrubs. It became a roast, an intervention, and a public trial all rolled into one. In the end, the HOA board voted unanimously to suspend Karen's participation in all HOA-related activities indefinitely. She was also served with a formal trespass warning, specifically banning her from entering my property again under any circumstances. As she stormed out of the room, someone in the back muttered, "Maybe she can drain her ego next." After the meeting, the neighborhood vibe noticeably shifted. People waved again. One neighbor even brought over cookies and asked if I consider hosting an actual pool party once my repairs were done. I smiled and said I'd think about it, but I wasn't quite finished. There was one final act to seal the deal. That week, I finished draining the remaining water, cleaned the entire pool, and added new lights. I painted a mural on the inside wall that could only be seen from Karen's second-story window. It featured a cartoon Karen holding a hose, getting blasted by sprinklers, while a speech bubble above her read, "This is what entitlement gets you." It was petty. It was hilarious. It was perfect. The next day, I caught her staring at it through binoculars. She slammed her window shut and disappeared from view. She didn't speak to me or anyone else for days. Her reign of fake HOA law was finally over. Peace returned to the neighborhood, and for the first time in months, my backyard felt like mine again. It wasn't about the pool, not really. It was about standing up to the kind of person who thinks rules don't apply to them, who believes everyone else should bend to their imaginary authority. And as I stood there under the sun, hose in hand, finally ready to refill the pool on my terms, I knew one thing for sure. Next summer was going to be a whole lot quieter. The quiet that settled over the neighborhood after the HOA meeting felt like stepping out of a hurricane and into a still, sunny morning. Karen's presence, once loud enough to rattle patio furniture, had vanished almost overnight. No more printed flyers taped to fences. No more fake citations stuffed into mailboxes. No more unsolicited surveys asking residents how they felt about the decline of communal aquatic values. It was almost eerie at first. I kept expecting her to pop up again with a new angle, maybe claiming that my lawn gnome violated spiritual symmetry, or that my garden hose was a trip hazard for invisible children. But she didn't. Not a word, not a visit, not a single scream from the other side of the fence. Just silence. That silence, however, didn't come without its cracks. A week after the HOA verdict, I saw her husband, an exhausted man named Ted who had survived years of Karen-induced secondhand embarrassment, loading cardboard boxes into the back of a moving truck. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just kept his head down, working with the speed of someone who knew this was his one shot at escape. Later that afternoon, a for sale sign appeared in front of their house. The rumor mill turned fast. Some said they were downsizing. Others claimed she'd been blacklisted from every HOA meeting in the county. But everyone agreed on one thing. Life had gotten instantly better the moment Karen decided to relocate. I had expected to feel triumphant when the house officially went on the market, but instead, I just felt relieved, like a pressure valve had been released. For months, I had been the unwilling protagonist in a bizarre suburban war over pool water and imaginary laws. Now I could finally be just another guy with a pool in a normal neighborhood. The mural inside the drained pool remained, partially out of spite and partially as a warning to future Karens who might wander too close. Some neighbors called it the community wall of justice. A few even brought their kids over just to take pictures next to it, like it was a local attraction. It didn't take long before a new family moved in, the Baileys, a young couple with a toddler, a golden retriever, and a level of friendliness that instantly made them more welcome than Karen had ever been. On move-in day, they brought over cupcakes, introduced themselves, and even asked if it was okay for their dog to roam near the fence line so it wouldn't spook me. I wanted to hug them. When I mentioned the pool, the husband laughed and said, "Oh, that thing looks like it could use a refill. Let us know if you ever want a hand fixing it up." I knew right then we were going to get along just fine. I decided to finally finish the restoration. The pump was repaired, the interior scrubbed clean of the last remaining algae stains, and the mural was preserved under a layer of waterproof sealant. I filled the pool over the course of several days, and when it was finally ready, I did something I hadn't done since moving in. I hosted an actual pool party. No flyers, no guilt trips, just an open invite to a few friendly neighbors, some burgers on the grill, cold drinks in the cooler, and laughter echoing across a backyard that finally felt like it belonged to me again. As the sun dipped low and kids splashed in the water, someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Diane from the HOA, holding a plate of barbecue and smiling. "You did it," she said. "I didn't really do anything," I replied. "Karen did all the work. I just held my ground." "Don't be modest," she said. "You exposed every flaw in that woman's illusion of power. You reminded everyone that community doesn't mean control. It means respect." Her words hit me harder than I expected. All those months I'd spent defending what I thought was just my pool turned out to be something bigger. It was about boundaries, literal and metaphorical. And now that those boundaries were respected, something incredible happened. The neighborhood started to thrive again. People talked more. Kids played outside without parents worrying about Karen calling code enforcement on sidewalk chalk. Even the holiday decorations started getting a little bolder, with flamingos, disco lights, and inflatable unicorns popping up like a celebration of freedom. A few weeks after Karen moved out, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a copy of the HOA handbook, the real one, with a sticky note on the front that read, "For when the next one comes. Pool war survivor." I laughed for a solid minute before tucking it into my filing cabinet, not because I expected another Karen anytime soon, but because it felt like a badge of honor, a symbol of having lived through a suburban saga and come out the other side with my sanity intact. Life went back to normal, but every now and then, I'd catch a memory sneaking back. The sound of her yelling through the fence, her late-night recon-missions with a garden hose, that time she tried to stage a community swim day in a bone-dry pool. It all felt so surreal in hindsight, like a fever dream narrated by a woman who thought property lines were optional and that screaming louder made you more correct. But it happened, and it left behind a better, more united neighborhood. There was one last surprise, though. A few months later, I received a notice from the city. Apparently, Karen had tried to file an appeal regarding her HOA banishment and had cited my pool mural as a public insult and visual aggression. The city official who reviewed the case sent me a copy of their decision. It was one sentence long. Homeowner is within his rights to display art on private property, especially when said art is inspired by documented events. Attached was a smiley face sticker and a handwritten note. "Nice mural." That sealed it. The saga of Karen and the pool was officially over, and my story had become neighborhood legend. Sometimes people ask me what I would have done differently. I tell them I would have installed the sprinklers earlier. But the truth is, without the chaos, I wouldn't have learned what it means to defend your space, to stand firm against absurdity, and to find humor in the face of petty tyranny. As I sat by the pool one evening, feet in the water and lights glowing beneath the surface, I raised a glass to the absurd battle I never asked for, and for the peace that followed. No more fake laws, no more garden hose invasions, just calm water, friendly neighbors, and the comforting knowledge that if another Karen ever tried to rise again, I'd be ready, with cameras, sprinklers, and maybe even a second mural.